It is not in stars to hold our destiny, but in ourselves. These are the words from Shakespeare. I'm Farsana and this is his solutions for UGC Net English. Now I'm going to talk about Shakespeare. Of course, about his life and of course about his writings. And I give more importance to the dramas. Okay. So, we know that he was born in Stratford, then went to London and pursued his career there, and of course, in the final years, he went back to Stratford. So, when we look into his career, we know that he known as a dramatist. So, in this career, we can divide it into four phases: the early phase of dramas, then the second phase, third phase, and the fourth phase. So in this video, I'm going to talk about these phases and of course the works. What are the works he produced during these phases?
We don't have much information about Shakespeare and his lifetime, but of course, he is a legend and his writings are a milestone in English literature. And he wrote about some 37 plays and few poems in his lifetime. And since then, as many hundred volumes have been written in praise of his accomplishment. And he died 3 centuries ago without caring enough for his own writings to print. And at present time, unnumbered critics, historians, scholars, they are still explaining the mind and the art displayed in that same neglected works of Shakespeare. And most of these eulogists begin or end their volume with the remark that Shakespeare is so great as to be above praise or criticism. But the most pathetic thing is not a single play of his come down to us as he wrote it. Coming to his life, he was born in Warwickshire village of Stratford, and it was in the month of April in 1564. His mother, Mary Arden, she was a farmer's daughter, and his father was a butcher and a small tradesman. There was a small grammar school in Stratford, and Shakespeare may attended it for few years. And when he was 14, his father was imprisoned for debt, and the boy probably left the school and went to work. And at the age of 18, he married Anne Hathaway. She was a peasant's daughter and she was 8 years older than Shakespeare. At 23, he left Stratford and went to London. That was his journey from solitude to crowd, or from beautiful rural scenes to the dirty street, or from natural country people to seekers after the bubbles of fame or fortune. Why he went is largely a matter of speculation. In the beginning, he acts in small roles, and soon he learned the tricks of the stage and the humors of the audience. And his first dramatic work was to revise old plays, giving them some new taste or settings to please the fickle public. Then he worked with other playwrights, with Lilly and Peeling. And the horrors of his Titus Andronicus are sufficient evidence of his collaboration with Marlowe. Finally, he walked alone, having learned his steps, and Romeo and Juliet and the Midsummer Night Dreams announced that a great poet and dramatist had suddenly appeared in England. This experimental period of Shakespeare's life in London was apparently a time of health, of joyousness, of enthusiasm, which comes with the successful use of one's powers. It was followed by a period of gloom and sorrow, to which something of bitterness was added. What occasioned the change is again a matter of speculation. The first conjecture is that Shakespeare was a man to whom the low ideals of Elizabethan stage were intolerable, and this opinion is strengthened after reading certain of Shakespeare's sonnets, which reflect a loathing for the theatres and the mannerless crowd that filled them. Another cause of his gloom was the fate of certain noblemen with whom he was apparently on terms of friendship, to whom he dedicated his poems and from whom he received the substantial gifts of money. Of these powerful friends, the Earl of Essex was beheaded for treason. Then Pembroke was banished. Then Southampton had gone to that grave of so many high hopes, the Tower of London. Shakespeare was the one who shared the sorrows of these men, as once he had shared their joy, and there are critics who assume that he was personally implicated in the crazy attempt of Essex at rebellion. Whatever the cause of his grief, Shakespeare shows in his works that he no longer looks on the world with the clear eyes of youth. For such a terrible mood of Shakespeare, London offered no remedy. For a time, Shakespeare seemed to have gloried in the city. Then he wearied of it, he grew disgusted with the stage, and finally, after some 24 years, sold his interest in theatres and shook the dust of London from his feet, and followed his herd back to Stratford. There he adopted the ways of a country gentleman, and there peace and serenity returned to him. He wrote comparatively little after his retirement, but the few plays of his last period, such as Cymbeline, then Winter's Tale, then The Tempest, they are the mellowest of his works. After a brief period of leisure, Shakespeare died at his prime in 1616 and was buried in the parish church of Stratford. And of his great works, now the admiration of the world, he thought of little that he never collected or printed them. Now coming to his dramas, I already told you he has wrote about some 37 plays in his lifetime, and we can divide it into 4 phases, that is the early phase, then second phase, third phase, and the last phase. So coming to the first phase, that is his experimental period from 1590 to 1595. In this period, Shakespeare began by revising old plays in conjunction with other actors. Henry VI is supposed to be an example of such work. And his work, Love's Labour Lost, it is an example of poet's first independent work. Then we have the dramas like Titus Andronicus, which he wrote with Marlowe, then Richard II, Richard III, then Two Gentlemen of Verona, then Comedy of Errors, then King John. All these are the group came from the first period. Then the second period, which was from 1595 to 16,000. In this period, Shakespeare constructed his plot with better skill and showed a greater mastery of blank verse and created some original characters, and especially he gave freedom to his romantic imagination, and all doubts and experiments vanished in this confident enthusiasm of this period. In this period, we have the dramas like As You Like It, then Romeo and Juliet, then Merchant of Venice, then Henry V, then Midsummer Night's Dream, then Much Ado About Nothing, then Henry IV, and of course Merry Wives of Windsor. These are the works from this second period, the period of perfection. Then coming to the third period, which was from 16,000 to 1610. And during this period, actually this is a period of maturity of power. And in this period, Shakespeare was overshadowed by some personal grief or disappointment. I already told you about his period of gloom and his period of disappointment, and his great tragedies belong to this period, tragedies which reveal or increase in dramatic power in Shakespeare, but also his loss of hope, his horrible convictions that man is not free being but a puppet blown about by every wind of fate or circumstance. These are the period in which he produced the writings like Othello, King Lear, Macbeth, Hamlet, and all other tragedies. Next is his final period. It was from 1610 to 1616, that is up to his death. And this period is of leisurely experiment, and in this period Shakespeare seems to have recovered in Stratford the cheerfulness that he had lost in London. He did little work during this period, but that little is of rare charm and sweetness. And the work belonging to this period is Coriolanus, Pericles, Cymbeline, The Winter's Tale, The Tempest, then Henry VIII. And this Henry VIII left unfinished. And the most convenient arrangement of this plays appears in first folio that occurred in 1623. This was the first edition of Shakespeare's plays, and it was prepared 7 years after the poet's death by two of his fellow actors, Hemming and Condell. And it contained all the plays now attributed to Shakespeare with the exception of Pericles. Okay, and they categorized Shakespeare's work into tragedies, comedies, and historical plays. So these are the most important thing about Shakespeare. Thank you.